All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to uncover some absolutely incredible human survival stories. And get this, they are hidden right inside the very words you're listening to right now. We use language every single day without even a second thought, right? But the true origins of our daily conversations are rooted in these epic, sprawling tales of ancient migrations, harsh climate shifts, and massive agricultural revolutions.
Seriously, where did the words you're reading right now actually come from? You know, it's super easy to assume that because languages like French, Hindi, and English sound completely different, they must have totally separate backstories. But here's the wild part. Even though modern languages sound incredibly diverse, billions of us are actually speaking variations of the exact same ancient tongues. These languages didn't just appear out of nowhere. They evolved, branched out, and literally conquered the globe right alongside our ancient ancestors.
50%. Just let that sink in for a second. Nearly half the entire global population speaks a language that stems from just one of these ancient linguistic families. That is billions of people sharing a single linguistic ancestor. To understand how on earth that happened, we're going to trace the lifelines of the three most significant language families on the planet, and we're starting with the biggest one of the bunch.
Section 1. Indo-European. Seeds and Steps. Think of this origin story like high-stakes scientific detective work. For a long time, researchers have furiously debated exactly how this language spread so far and wide from its cradle near the Caucasus and Anatolia. Historically, there were basically two main camps. First, you had the Anatolian or farming hypothesis, which suggested that the language was carried really slowly by migrating agricultural communities. On the flip side, the steppe or Kurgan hypothesis argued that nomadic horseback-riding warriors spread their language super rapidly through conquest.
Well, recent findings have actually pointed us toward a brilliant hybrid theory. So instead of an either-or situation, purely farmers or purely warriors, it looks like early farming expansions actually laid the initial groundwork. That created the very first splits in the language. Then, a much later, massive expansion from the steppe region truly pushed the language family across the continents. It was essentially a one-two punch of agriculture, followed by aggressive nomadic mobility.
So how exactly do words migrate across continents? The answer is something called demic diffusion. Now, this wasn't just words blowing on the wind or people shouting across borders. This required really deep cultural contact. Real people physically packed up their lives and migrated. They brought entirely new farming technologies and trade networks to local communities. And then those local communities ended up adopting the language of the newcomers.
And the result of all that physical movement? A sprawling, deeply interconnected family tree. Early farming communities pushed into Europe, which set the stage for the Italic, Romance, and Germanic branches. Meanwhile, another massive migration pushed toward the Indian subcontinent, forming the Indo-Iranian branch. So if you're reading these slides in English, or if you speak Spanish, Russian, or Hindi, you are quite literally participating in this massive family tree right now.
All right, moving on to Section 2, Sino-Tibetan, the Eastern Migration.
1.5 billion. We are leaving the steppes now, traveling east to the Neolithic Yellow River Basin and walking right into an absolute language powerhouse. This family contains over 400 distinct languages, including Chinese and Burmese. And with 1.5 billion modern speakers, it's second only to the Indo-European family. But where exactly did this massive network of voices actually begin?
To piece this puzzle together, modern linguists use something called Bayesian phylogenetic methods. I know it sounds super complicated, but basically, these are highly advanced computational models that analyze vocabulary and grammar to build out these vast language family trees. And by using these methods, researchers have been able to trace all 400 of these diverse languages back to a single, cohesive origin point rooted in early millet farming communities over in northern China.
And through this, we can literally map out how demic diffusion split this ancestral tongue into two primary branches. As these ancient people mastered millet agriculture, their populations just boomed, which basically forced them to expand. The Eastern or Sinitic branch spread out all throughout China. Meanwhile, the Western or Tibeto-Burman group tackled the harsh terrains of the Tibetan Plateau, the Himalayas, and Southeast Asia. The language grew precisely where the millet seeds were planted.
Which brings us to Section 3, Afro-Asiatic, the Saharan Shift.
This is a deeply, deeply ancient group of over 300 languages, currently spoken by more than 500 million people today. Now, when it comes to tracing its geographic origins, there's actually a bit of a debate going on. While a minority of researchers make a case for a Levant origin up in the Fertile Crescent, the primary, most widely accepted theory places this family's cradle firmly in northeastern Africa, around the Red Sea Hills, the Horn of Africa, or what is now the Sahara Desert. But here's what I find truly fascinating. It was actually dramatic climate change that directly paced the migration of these early speakers. Get this. Afro-Asiatic divergences began way back around 18,000 BCE. But then, around 8500 BCE, the Sahara started this severe desiccation process. It literally turned from a lush green environment into a totally barren desert. This brutal climate shift forced early pastoralists to completely abandon the drying Sahara, pushing them toward the Nile Valley and the Horn of Africa just to survive.
And this really was a desperate survival migration. It scattered groups across vast territories, eventually settling into the distinct branches that we recognize today. You had Berber speakers moving into northern Africa, while Chadic speakers settled down in the Sahel. The Cushitic and Omotic branches stayed dominant down in the Horn of Africa. The ancient Egyptians built their entire civilization along the Nile, and the Semitic branch moved extensively into Western Asia. So the drying out of the Sahara essentially drew the linguistic map of the Middle East and Northern Africa.
Finally, Section 4, the echoes of ancient voices, language as living fossils. So, as we've seen in our explainer today, the incredible diversity of modern speech isn't just some random assortment of sounds. Every single time we speak, we are echoing the literal survival tactics of ancient farmers, nomadic warriors, and pastoralists fleeing a drying desert. Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating final thought to ponder. Today, we are facing our own rapidly changing climate, not to mention these unprecedented digital migrations where we can connect across the globe in milliseconds. So thousands of years from now, how will our actions today shape the linguistic fossils of the future? What new language families are receding right now? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and I'll see you next time.